All right, Brian Cook from Vuni Gear. Hey, real quick, I just got off the phone with a customer and a Vuni customer, and he was sharing his experiences that he's had with Vuni Gear this year. And he's like, why don't you tell, we had a conversation that lasted probably an hour, and he's like, why don't you share more of this information? And I'm like, because I feel like customers have to have this experience. Now, so I was thinking about this while we were having the conversation, and I was thinking about my experience in archery and as a bow hunter. And I've been bow hunting for a little over 30 years. And when I first started hunting with a bow, how drastic bows have changed, from when I started hunting 30 years ago. And I remember a couple things that happened in my archery career that timelined, and one of them is the reason that kind of started me as a bow shop owner, and that was the carbon arrow. The carbon arrow was built in the late 90s by Marvin Carlston, who founded Gold Tip. And Gold Tip was built here in Utah. And I remember when the arrow came out, none of the local archery stores really wanted to carry it, nor did they really give much interest into it. And as a matter of fact, that's how I became an archery and arrow dealer. Was I didn't even own a pro shop. I worked for my father, and I convinced my dad to let me sell arrows through our local welding shops, which I know welding and archery doesn't go together, but I had a huge passion for archery, and our local pro shops didn't really want anything to do with it. And so I knew that was where the industry was going to go. And in the late 90s, at this same time, I remember, I shot Hoyt and loved Hoyt because I'm a Utah local. Hoyt, was support your locals. But I remember the company named Matthews had launched a bow that was called the Q2. And one of my really good friends, said he was going to go buy this Q2. And I remember being like, dude, if you go buy a Q2, you can find a new, you're going to buy a Matthews, you can find a new hunting partner. We're going to stay true and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, he went and bought this bow, showed up one night at my house, and we were shooting, and he pulls this bow out, and I looked at him like he was an idiot. And I honestly thought he was an idiot. And I remember him just saying, Brian, until you shoot this bow, don't say anything. So, I pulled out my new Hoyt, and I was all excited, and, he had pulled out his new Matthews, and we shot a couple rounds, and I didn't really think much of it, other than his seemed a little quieter. I wasn't going to admit it, but his did seem a little bit quieter. And, after we'd shot, 4 or 5 rounds, he said, do you want to shoot it? And I'm like, no, I'm good. He's like, dude, come on, just shoot the bow. We were both the same draw length. So I picked up his bow, drew it back. And when I drew it back, I noticed it was significantly easier to draw. And he claimed it was the same poundage, but it was quite significant that it was easier to draw. And when I shot it, it was like butter in my hands. Like, it was unbelievable. Like, the difference between my bow was like shooting a 10 gauge shotgun, and then his bow was shooting a 410, just completely different. And I remember looking at him and he looked at me and says, see, now you know why I bought that bow. And I'm like, well, there's no way it's as fast, And so anyway, I'm telling you this story because Matthews was so different than what I was used to that it was unacceptable. Like, no, we're not doing it, right? Well, that same time frame is when the carbon arrow came out. And, I remember going to my local shops asking about this carbon arrow, and nobody had it. And all I got was all the negative, and how you're going to end up with carbon fiber in your meat, it could splinter and go in your hand, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm sure some of that may have been true or rang true at the beginning. And still, everybody knows that if you damage a carbon arrow, it can break and end up in the back of your hand when you shoot your bow. But there were so many positives to that carbon arrow that the few little negatives were willing, you know, I was looking at the risk versus the reward, and it was like, man, there's just so much more reward than there is the risk. And so this is how I became a pro shop, is nobody wanted to carry the carbon arrow. And so I talked my dad into letting me sell these carbon arrows because I wanted the carbon arrow and I wanted to see the success of the carbon arrow. So I took the carbon arrow in as a welding shop. I was selling carbon arrows, and I sold quite a few of them. Again, it was probably more or less to support my own bad habit than anything, but I wanted the carbon arrow. Well, as time would have it, at Humphreys Archery began, you know, I'm telling this on Vuni, but this is where my history comes from. Humphreys Archery started in 2001, and at that same time, the Matthews Legacy had come out. I think Matthews Legacy came out in 2000. And that bow was so different than any bow out on the market because of its parallel limb that it almost was shunned. You know, unless you were a diehard Matthews fan, the bow was shunned by the rest of the industry. Well, leap forward to where we are today. Every hunting bow on the market today has a parallel limb, but yet no one was willing to support it. No one. Nobody wanted to get behind it. I mean, unless you shot it, your experience, you had to have an experience with a Matthews Legacy before you would ever shoot it. It was so different than any bow you had ever seen, but it had so many more pros than cons. The riser was longer than anything else out there. It was more stable in your hand. The two limbs being parallel with one another caused no reaction for the bow to jump forward. Wrist straps didn't even need to be worn on a Matthews Legacy. The look of that bow changed this industry 100%, but it was so different that nobody wanted to accept it. Now, why do I share this with you? Well, because 30 years ago when I started bow hunting, I was in the norm with everybody else. You did what everybody else told you, and you followed suit with what the trend was, and you just went that way. Well, through the years, I've seen those trends change. Believe it or not, I think that Humphreys Archery was the first one to ever build a 5-pin slider sight. I still have the sight to prove it. And I know that Josh at Spot Hog and Cabe at Spot Hog can back this story up. Even Sherlock, because we ended up taking a Sherlock slider and marrying it with a Spot Hog front end, and I had a machinist machine me apart and put the two together to make the first 5-pin slider. So over the years, but the world, you know, my store and the store that I was selling it out and the people I was educating fell in love with it immediately. They saw the benefits over the con immediately. But the rest of the world, Josh and Cabe will still tell you, well, the rest of the archery world won't accept it. It took years to implement those sights into the industry, but that's what everybody shoots today. I see the sights that are coming in that are the latest trend, and I look at them and roll my eyes and be like, it's the same freaking thing we've been shooting for 30 years. Nobody's changing anything. But when it comes to camo, you know, I hunted in green, just like most of you do. Years and years I hunted in green. And then one year I went on a bear hunt in Canada, on a spring bear hunt, where a friend of mine walked out in a camo that was not green. And I remember looking at him and his wife and being like, are you too crazy? What are you wearing? And they persisted to tell me the camo and what this camo name was and why the benefits of not wearing green were green. And at that time I was like, you're telling me we're in ferns, green pine trees, and green grass that is as tall as my chest, and you don't want to be in green? Didn't make sense to me. We hunted that hunt. I was successful in my green camo. My dad was successful in his green camo. Braden was successful in his not so green camo. But I remember thinking about how there was a day that I went hunting with him, and I watched him drop off this hillside, and I watched him walk through this big valley and up the other side, and I lost him. I honestly, truthfully lost him. And I'd been making fun of his camo the whole time we were there. And I was so impressed with how well that camo hid itself that I came home and started putting my own research together on this camouflage and the science behind not green and why hunters shouldn't wear green. So after a couple years, I implemented that camo into my own line and started testing it. And I noticed an incredible difference between how the animals reacted to me. Now, did animals still see me? Sure, they did. But their reaction was different. And that was what was so enticing to me, was there were times that I could be standing in the wide open and an animal didn't even give me two looks. Never looked back for a second look. There were times that I was trying to move or get in on an animal that I got busted, and the animal recognized me and it did the whole like double take, and we had a stare off for 5-10 minutes, and all of a sudden the animal is back to feeding. And I thought, man, that's weird. You know, once an animal usually senses you or sees you, they're gone. So I started noticing that the reaction of the animal was different. So I implemented more and more of this camo. Well, over the years, I hunted in this camo and had tremendous success, and stories that I could share forever about how close animals actually got to me. Now, don't mind, I know you got to play the wind, you got to play the sound. I mean, you can't take away all the senses of an animal, but the sight was something that I noticed a big difference with. The only time I noticed that I got busted in that camo was if I was a long ways away. Now, if I was a couple 100 yards out and tried to move freely, I got busted every time. But if I got down into where I was about 100 yards out and could move around, it seemed like I was almost part of the forest. It was weird. I could be in the greenest of green surroundings and move through that forest as if I was the exact same color. I don't know why, but it worked. And there were times that I was caught in the wide open, standing, and animals would go back to feeding. Or they would just walk past me, which was weird. And I kept thinking, man, there is definitely something to this non-green camo. So I share this with you because the experience that I just had with the hunter that was on the phone with me is the exact same conversation. Brian, what is it that creates this opportunity? Why are animals seeing me differently? Well, the truth of the matter is animals don't see green the way that humans see green. Ungulates see greens as shades of grays and whites. There is some olive drab type color frame there, but if you do your research on the ungulate and how an ungulate sees, now ungulate, for those of you that are questioning what's an ungulate, any split-hoofed animal is an ungulate. They have a horizontal pupil and they have more rods than cones. And so you and I have more cones than rods. So we see colors, we live in a colored world. Ungulates live in I guess a non-colored world, if you'd want to play it. They have colors, don't get me wrong. If any of you seen an infrared camera that you think, oh, well, the human eye doesn't pick up infrared, but tell me one animal that you've put a camera on the side of a tree that the first picture of the animal might not be looking at it, but the very next picture of the animal staring straight at you, right? They see those shades of infrared. They see those colors, but they don't see the same way that you and I do. And that camera should tell you something. If you and I can sit and stand at that camera and never see it, but an animal can, they don't see the same way as you and I. Now, why is it that every animal that we hunt isn't green? We don't hunt green elk. We don't hunt green deer. We don't hunt green mule deer, green antelope. Every animal that we hunt is brown, tan, and black. The same colors of Vuni. Browns, tans, and blacks. Why can an animal not even exist to you and I at 40, 50 yards, 60 yards, 70 yards? Of course, when it gets farther and farther out, that's easier to miss, but why can an animal be so close and not be green and you and I can't see it? We're in a green environment. We're looking at green. It's not camouflaged, but you and I don't see it. Why? Because it exists inside of a negative space to you and I. Sure, you and I know what brown, tan, and black looks like, but We don't break down browns, tans, and blacks in our environment. Now, a trained eye and a trained professional and those that sit and stare through glass and do this for a living have trained themselves to really look for those shades of colors and those shapes and those antler tips or the ears or the white underneath the neck or those descriptions of an animal. That's what they're looking for. But isn't it interesting that something that's brown, tan, and black cannot even exist to you and I, but yet we'll look at camo and say, oh, I need to be in green in order to be hidden in that environment. No, you don't. And what is it about green that makes an animal see differently? I mean, have you ever seen a deer or elk run into a tree? No. But yet they can run through that forest at 100 miles an hour. You and I can't even take off on a dead run. We'll trip on every branch that's underneath the green. Every log, every rock, we'll trip on it. Why? Because it doesn't exist in our world. It does when you trip over it and you look at it and go, freak, right? But you didn't see it. It's because it's in your negative space. We don't see the same way ungulates do. So, why is Vuni so different? Put it on the shelf with everything else out there. It's different than anything else out there. The pattern is larger than any other pattern out there. Why? Because I want it to work at 300 yards. I want it to work at 200 yards. We played with different backgrounds. We made it darker to begin with. And the world would have accepted it in a darker pattern, but it didn't function as well in a darker pattern. If I put a darker background on that tan, sure, the human eye can't detect it, but by dang it, 50 to, or about 100 yards to 125 yards, like the other camo I was wearing, I'm a silhouette. You could pick me out with your naked eye that fast. So could every other ungulate. We wanted to break up Vuni. I wanted Vuni to break up at 150, 200 yards. Because that's where you get busted when you're on a spot and stock. You get busted at 200 yards. You get busted at 150 yards. Once you get inside the 100-yard mark, you're on your own. You better know when you can move, when you can't move. That ungulate has a 6 to 8 power magnification on its head. You can't fool its eyes. The only thing that's going to help you fool its eyes is if it cannot see the lines and the shape of a human body. The dominant predator to every animal is the human. If it can make out your head, your shoulders, your arms, your legs, you're done. Period. That's why camouflage is beneficial, is to break up the human silhouette. It's not breaking up your chest, it's breaking up your outline. You're trying to break up the outline of the human body. The human body's outline is what gives every ungulate the fear of flight and to get the heck out of there. Camouflage needs to remain light, and it needs to remain big patterns. So this is my way of sharing with you what I'm trying to, this is the last customer that just called me. Brian Bedoya, there you go. This is why I've had this conversation. You have to have your own experience, just like the Matthews bow. Until you go shoot a Matthews bow, back in the day, not trying to promote Matthews here because there's some great companies out there, but I'm going back to 2000. If you didn't shoot a Matthews bow in 2000, you didn't know what you were missing. Just like if you didn't shoot a carbon arrow in the early 2000s, you also didn't know what you were missing. But today, camouflage has been sold to you and I in green for 100 years. But as science has proven and technology has proven, ungulates do not see the same way that we do. So if you want to try something different, Vuni brings you a high performance gear. We have resourced the very best product, the very best materials, and we've done it in a way that I don't think anybody else out there has as far as fit goes. Now, if you're over a 2X, I'm sorry, Vuni isn't there yet. We have taken everything and fit it to the human body in a fitted, more athletic cut. Because as a bow hunter, I don't want all the extra. I don't want a boxy coat. I don't want boxy pants. I don't want straight leg pants. I don't want pants that are rubbing together on the mountain when I'm hiking. I want things that fit and fit me. I'm 6'4". I weigh 215 pounds. I got a 34-inch waist with a 36-inch inseam. Every pant out there does not fit me. Sure, if I buy the bigger 36 waist, I can make it long enough, but everybody's inseams are not true 36s. So I wanted a camo, and I build a camo, me and my partner, sorry, I keep referring to me, but me and my business partner, my brother-in-law, build a camo that fit us. We wanted something that fit our body type. We are not chubby, no offense, but I wanted my camo to fit me and not fit the generic Brian. I'm not saying I'm fit by any means, people. I'm 50 years old. Trust me, I've got fat where fat should be on a 50-year-old guy. But I try to take care of myself. So I don't have a big belly, and I'm not carrying excess amounts of weight. So I don't have a pant that's just random. My pants fit. My jackets fit. Our shirts fit. So if you want something that fits, try Vuni. You want something that's different than anything else out there, try Vuni. And I'd like your feedback. This is 30 years of me as a bow hunter. Wait till you put on one of my pair of pants, our pair of pants. The vents. We vented. You can't open a window on this side of the vehicle and not open this window and get everybody in the vehicle air conditioned. You have to create movement in order for air to move. Crotch vents. Crotch vents allow air to move from inner thigh to the outer thigh. If you're just venting the outer thigh, you're not venting the area that really needs to be vented. So we build a pant and designed a pant around the vents. It works, and it works flawlessly. Now, we launched 21 line items when we launched this company. We had to hit kind of the middle of the road. We didn't come out with all the specialty items that some of our competitors have, and our competitors are the ones that have forged the road that we have even been able to do this. So I am not trying to knock down anybody else that's out there. There are great camo companies out there. I just wanted something that was more tailored to my style of hunting, and as a bow hunter that's on the ground and moving. I'm a mover. I do not sit. Doesn't mean our camo can't be on somebody that sits, but I'm not a sitter. I move, and I want to be able to move in from a long distance, and I want to not be picked up at 300 yards and not be picked up. Sure, you might pick me up at 300 yards, but that animal won't. So you want to try something different? Give Vuni a try. Love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much.